the state of terror in which these pathetic BBC executives live. Because they were saying to him, you can't believe Amnesty, you can't believe the UN.
The head of the BBC has resigned over allegations that the broadcaster is not just anti-Trump, but also anti-Israel.
Are you going ahead and suing the BBC?
Well, I guess I have to. You know, why not? Because they defrauded the public.
Joining me now to discuss this is veteran journalist Peter Oborne, who's just written a book investigating the role of the British media and its coverage of Gaza. Peter, do you think that the BBC is pro-Palestinian?
So there's thesis that the BBC is a not simply a sort of favours Palestine, but actively pro-Hamas, is very much believed, and is of course essentially the thesis of this enormous document allegedly written by Michael Prescott, which ended up mysteriously in the Daily Telegraph a week or so ago.
I'm the reporter that broke the BBC bias story.
A leaked dossier has accused the BBC's Arabic service of minimising Israeli suffering in its coverage of the war in Gaza.
And that dossier that Michael Prescott has submitted to the BBC, in it he makes allegations about particularly the BBC Arabic service having these Hamas sympathies. What do you make of that?
Mr. Prescott's independent report, remember it's an independent report, is now I'm studying actually in the middle. I came from reading that report and fact-checking it. Okay. And it's not looking good for Mr. Prescott.
You're not convinced so far?
At the moment, the evidence I'm reading, I'm fact-checking his claims. There's one massive point needs to be made, is that it's entirely from a pro-Israel perspective. He doesn't actually even consider the idea the BBC might have been pro-Israel, give evidence of which is enormous. He doesn't give this evidence that was presented so beautifully, for instance, by the Centre for Media Monitoring. You get 33 times more attention if you're a Jewish or an Israeli person than you do if you're Palestinian Arab in the mainstream Western media, the BBC, I should say. The mysterious thing they haven't, ever had Abby Schleim on mainstream BBC. I mean, who is the leading expert on Israel and the Middle East. He's emeritus professor of international relations at Oxford. There he is in Oxford, firing on all cylinders, and knows more about the subject than anybody else. And I find it very odd that he and Ilan Pappé haven't been brought on at all. Whereas, all these loudmouths who really know nothing, these know-nothing sort of shock jocks.
So Israeli professors aren't qualified to be interviewed on the BBC, but sort of...
They're Jewish, they've served in the IDF, they've studied Israel all their life, but the BBC doesn't want to hear from them, and you have to conclude it's not because they are critics of Israel.
I found your book was really helpful as well because it pointed back to more historical examples in the last 20 years or so, where the rare occasions where BBC journalists have tried to be more critical or even just objective about what Israel's doing. Can you tell us about the pushback that they received for trying to do their job?
I go through the long sustained pressure aimed at all journalists really, but very particularly I think there is a special interest in the BBC. Olga Guerin or Jeremy Bowen, the Middle East reporters, were targeted, as was actually Jonathan Dimbleby, for standing up for them by various pro-Israeli organisations in the noughties. Now, what was interesting though about this is that the BBC, generally speaking, stood up to the Israeli pressure 20 years ago, and for the last 2 years, it's been paralysed by it. This is well documented. I mean, Ben de Pere, in that historic article he wrote in The Observer, because remember, he was the producer of the Medics film from inside Gaza, which the BBC eventually canned.
We are in the theatre, in the operating room, full darkness, no water, no electricity. But we have a hero, surgeons in Gaza.
As Israel has bombed Gaza, hundreds of Palestinian doctors and medics have refused to leave their hospitals.
His accounts with the of his conversations with the editorial staff at the BBC are very chilling. Israel would say, you can't believe Amnesty. You can't believe the UN. And according to Ben, it was very interesting. It's almost captured the BBC because they were saying to him, you can't believe Amnesty. You can't believe the UN. Now, that's fascinating. What the state of terror in which these pathetic BBC executives live, I think. And I've thought about that conversation because I've talked to them, and to begin with, I thought they were simply biased, But I don't think that anymore. I just don't think they know what they're talking about. I don't think they understand. And it is hard to understand, what the truth is on the ground and how Israel operates and what its procedures are, how the occupation works and all of that. Although underlyingly, I do think they sort of think the Israelis are respectable, they're a British ally. One wonders a little bit, not maybe with these politically correct BBC types, but in places you get an underlying racism, I think.
And why hasn't there been more of a pushback from the media against these pro-Israel lobby groups and pressure groups that try and silence reporters quite regularly?
Well, the media is on the same side of those pressure groups. Just yesterday or the day before, there was a bit of footage went round of a senior executive inside the BBC, I think. He'd been on some form of facility trip with Mossad.
To know that these people carry out these kinds of fantastic operations, it's what makes you tremendously proud. Absolutely. Talking about it, still gives me goosebumps.
The interesting thing is that no British newspaper, mainstream, has covered it. Now, let's try a thought experiment. Imagine that the security correspondent of the BBC had gone on air and said, "Oh, God, MI6 took me off somewhere. They're such clever people." He'd have to be sacked because it would appear that we accept as Brits that MI6 is us, not them, yeah. But you cannot be captured by an organisation, right? You can't raving about them is just off. And I think he would have had to resign if he was going on about MI6, because he's going on about Mossad. It's perfectly okay. Or rather, people just avert their eyes. Yeah.
And in your book and at Declassified, we've documented the British military's collaboration with Israel throughout the genocide, the intelligence sharing and these almost daily surveillance flights that the Royal Air Force was sending over Gaza. Now, it's just emerged that the Starmer government have actually suspended some intelligence sharing with the US in the Caribbean because of their concerns about these bombing of boats allegedly carrying drugs into the US. What do you make of that? Because often we think, well, we can't upset Israel because it might upset the US, but in this case, we have stood up to the US over what it's doing in the Caribbean.
I think it is very noticeable, and I don't think people mention this enough, that Britain has never said that Israel is committing war crimes. The nearest we got to was last September. We said there's a risk of war crimes being committed. I think it was David Lammy said that. Well, the evidence is simply overwhelming. And I think the reason why Mr. Sir Keir Starmer has chosen not to do that is because once he says that the war crimes have been committed, we have to dramatically change our relationship with Israel. We certainly have to stop supplying weapons, and that is something which he clearly doesn't feel he wants to do. And that, I think, is less to do with Israel than his relationship with the United States. But it is interesting that he's ready to jeopardize Britain's intelligence relationship, which is regarded as absolutely sacred, isn't it, with the United States over Venezuela, but not over Israel.
Thanks, Peter, for taking the time to talk to Declassified today about your book. If you haven't read it already, the book Complicit is on sale. And Peter is one of our contributors to Declassified as well, so you'll see more of his articles on our website in future. Thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please hit the button below. Thanks for watching.